Well, hello. My name is Ned, and it's good to have you in this breakout session here at Solarize. When I heard that what the topic was looking at masculine healing and a path to masculine healing, one of the things that occurred to me is we can't really talk about this without also including sexuality. And so I immediately thought of my amazing wife and bride and partner, and Jamie Abenroth, who is a sex therapist and trained not only as a psychotherapist, but has done extensive work in specifically within the role of around sexuality, and works with individuals and with couples in her practice. So, Jamie, it's so fun to to be in this conversation with you. Thanks so much for agreeing to do it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's fun to share spaces together.
What I thought I'd do to start is just to, when we talk about masculine healing, a path to masculine healing, it presupposes a wound or a brokenness. And most of the time, I'd love to talk about the path to healing, but maybe we could just start and spend a few minutes on the brokenness part of it, the woundedness. And I know that everyone who's listening to this, who's a man, knows that like we are all wounded when it comes to our sexuality. And our sexuality has not been blessed in many cases. And there's so much shame, there's so much anxiety, there's so many things that are stirred up for, I'm assuming women as well, but I know for sure for men in this.
Absolutely women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of this has to do with the heritage we have of toxic masculinity, which when we talk about toxic masculinity, we're talking about a few, the research would say a few things that would always be there. One is emotional suppression, it's a sense of stoicism. And there is no great sex without accessing one's heart, one's emotions. So already toxic masculinity starts to stack the deck against us if we're completely taking that part of the human experience out of the equation. Then the next one is domination, a tendency towards domination and even violence. And again, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about maybe consent and mutuality within within sexuality. Not that power dynamics can't be a wonderful way of expressing, but just at its baseline, the tendency to always be in a place of domination in order to prove one's manliness. It's incredibly problematic. Do you want to say anything about that before I keep going down this list?
Yeah, so you're talking more about domination. Will you give me a picture of what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, certainly, if we were to look at like kind of the worst, kind of the worst expressions, if you were to go into a locker room and hear very, kind of the most crass forms of masculinity, they will be trying to prove their prestige over how they acted out sexually with a woman. And the language could be, I banged her, I really showed her. It's much of the language, even if we were to start talking about what are the different languages for words for having some kind of sexual activity, they often have a sense of violence, a sense of violence with them. And so that's the need for domination as a way of proving one's manliness. I mean, it goes beyond sexuality, but certainly we see it within this. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, I think more when you give me that picture, one thing that comes to my mind that I hear a lot of is that men probably primarily will say things. And if anyone has a reaction to it, like let's say another man had a reaction to it, there would be no ownership of the actual violence or usage of, or that kind of thing. It'll be packaged up in terms of it was a joke, and so I think that that's one thing with regard to toxic masculinity is if you do feel like something's off or there's a part of your heart or you know it, that it's often dismissed in this package of, well, come on, you know,
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
take this versus why should anyone take that?
Right.
What does it really create? So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's totally what you were getting at. Is I know you were talking about consent too, and I could talk about that or
Well,
I don't want to go.
let's finish just laying out these. I just think that all of these base things about toxic masculinity all
Mhm.
speak to the woundedness that men have at the very
Yeah,
beginning of the conversation, and they all intersect the way
yeah.
we express ourselves sexually.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the first one, of course, is emotional suppression. The second one is this tendency towards domination and violence. The next one is to be anti-female. And so, you know, hey, don't be a pussy is just basically say, don't be a girl, don't be a feminine, that any way of showing up in a way that is connected to the feminine side that we all carry
Hmm.
within us as men
Hmm.
is seen as somehow, you know, that you are not being a man in that moment. And so again, we're
As if, you know, as if saying being a woman or girl or feminine is weak.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Such judgment, right, in those words.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
Um,
it couldn't be more off.
yeah. Amen. Yeah. Yes. I know this to be true from being married with you. So, um, then the next one would be promiscuity, which not which just to parse that out, that this isn't necessarily saying that having like multiple partners is in itself problematic, but promiscuity as a form of like making marks on a belt, like
Mhm.
tallying sexual conquest,
Yeah,
that
as a
is
way to show your worth.
yes, and yeah, and really it objectifies women, right, or whoever the partner is. I mean, it objectifies. So the promiscuity is a way of forming of trying to prove worth inherently objectifies the entire encounter, and it's not about mutuality, and it's not about intimacy or relationship. So homo
It's more about insecurity, really, is what it's about.
yeah,
If a man is the one who's proving himself there or trying to, it's because there's a lack of knowing who he is to begin with.
yeah. um, Homophobia would be another part of toxic masculinity, and then particularly in the United States, the elevation of the mind over the heart, the mind over the body, and living in our heads. I think this sexuality is inherently an embodied way of being, and so this tendency for men in the West and Northern Europe, the U.S., etc. That's a getting in the way. But just to put this out there, are there how would you talk about the wounds that men have in if we're just to before we get to healing, how would you talk about the wounds that you're seeing particularly that might be different from that list that we just brought up?
Mhm. Well, one thing that goes back to this idea of consent that I see a lot is men, you know, in the partners that I'll see, will touch their partner sexually, even when the partners have asked them not to do that. Or there will be this entitlement where it's not the idea of living with another free human being who can say yes or no, but really once you're married or you're partnered, you have this idea that you're owed and that really the other person's body belongs to you. And even if, you know, even if men wouldn't say that, you know, and not all guys are like that, but um, just by virtue of touching your partner's body or genitals or breasts when you know they don't want you to, that is saying that you own their body because you don't have to receive consent to be able to do that, to move forward. So, you know, I would say that's a big one is entitlement. Um, and that breeds obligation in the partner. Other wounds. I think another big one is men all the time that I meet with say they're concerned about their performance. And I think maybe you could help me here because, you know, when a guy says he's concerned about his performance, I'm really thinking that that means how long he can go without ejaculating or how long he can keep his erection. Maybe it's about pleasure of the partner or if she has an orgasm, but that's something I hear all the time is, you know, my performance. That's the number one thing that I think men say is they're concerned about their performance. And I think that's a huge wound because I still think I'm trying to figure out exactly what it means.
Yeah.
When, you know, and you may have a better idea of that being a
No, I
man.
think you're right. And it probably goes right, it goes hand in hand with this myth that sex is really about, um, you know, penile penetration of the vagina, right? As opposed to an exploration of erotic kind of just eroticism and pleasure.
Mhm.
And so just in that very narrow light, which is, hey, it's all about penetration and how long it lasts and how, you know, all of this, then yeah, men can easily go to shame. And I mean, to me, it's a conversation that we can't really solve. We have to just stop having, to some level, we have to start a better conversation, which is one I know you're having all the time, which is, and maybe you could just speak about what is sex, what is eroticism, and expanding the container of what that can mean.
Yeah. So, you know, the first thought that I had was I like the idea of telling people they can't touch their partner's genitals and vice versa or breasts, and then tell them to make love or tell them to have sex, which is utilizing all different parts of your body, which, you know, there's several places on the body that have erogenous zones on them, right? So really exploring what kind of touch do you desire in the moment? And you're not gonna know. It actually reminds me of counsel, to be honest, because you're not anticipating ahead of time what you're gonna say and you're in your own mind, but you're really paying attention to what's going on. And then when it's your turn, you sink in and you see what's right there. What do you have desire for? And you just speak to it in the moment. And yeah, that feels like an answer to me. So
That's beautiful. I hear you talk about eroticism as this sensual experience of simply being enlivened and awakened, and it can be engagement with the natural world, with food, with,
yeah.
speak about that for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, you know, when you go outside and you smell a pine tree, or, you know, I've seen some people stick their nose in between like the bark on a pine tree and it smells like vanilla. And it's that idea of getting so close to something where you're taking it in and you're being receptive to it. Could be the same thing when you walk in a bakery and, you know, your eyes look at all these gorgeous, you know, desserts that have been handcrafted and your mouth starts watering and you imagine what it tastes like and you're smelling the smells. And there's so much of this sensual experience that you're taking in, or you might feel your own desire through saliva or your eyes widen, or, you know, you have a smile come across your face. That's a template for sex is taking in the smells and the sights and, you know, being receptive. I think I hear children.
Hey, Wink. Hey, honey, I'm in the middle of a call. This is the joys of parenting when we're both doing this at the same time. Yeah, I mean, the way you're describing it is this, I mean, no wonder when there's so much body shame that men are carrying, and I know women are carrying as well.
Mm-hmm.
that we're inherently like, we're already, I mean, just the first thing is just to get into our bodies and to begin to explore each other's bodies.
And then the other thing I want to say about that, right, is that it's a depth thing too, because you could touch someone's face and it could feel kind of wooden. And everyone knows that experience. If you touch your partner or they touch you and it feels kind of stiff and you can't actually feel the human being behind the touch. And so, actually having the person drop it and relax a little bit, you can start to feel them as they're touching you. And then the more a person relaxes and kind of lets down and lets you feel them, now you're in contact with that person's, I mean, you could call it heart or presence or essence while they're touching you. And a lot of times for couples, when they receive touch, it's not that pleasurable because the person's not really making contact with you. They're off in their own head, or they're worried about their performance or whatever. And that's why the touch doesn't feel good, because there's no human behind it allowing themselves to be felt. So it's not just exploring another person's body or knowing the right technique or whatever. That's like a lower level of development that we all go through, is kind of figuring out the mechanics. But this stuff is around how much are you going to let down and really reveal yourself and let yourself be touched by the other person. And that's when, you're just bringing in so much more, fullness or humanity or eroticism, or like the bakery comes into focus. Rather than you're outside of the bakery touching the glass and you can't get there.
Well, I love that exercise of giving people like taking away some of the normal paths that they might rush down to what they think might be sex, and saying, okay, could we make love simply with deep eye gazing, and simply, or could we take away another, even take away our eyes and make love with some other avenue.
And I think the one other pitfall that I think a lot of people get in is this idea that penetrative sex is the ultimate thing you can do, right? And that kind of these other things around eye gazing or kissing or, sensual touching is really just the stuff that you do so that you can get to the real thing, versus you can make so much depth of contact with another person that can be much more meaningful or sensual, or, people crying because it really is engaging a deeper part of them that goes far beyond, the kind of penetrative sex that people often have, right? Where one person feels entitled, the other person feels obligated, there's resentment. Oftentimes, the partner saying, could you hurry up? Or, the person who's doing the penetrating knows that their partner doesn't really want to be there. Why is that the ultimate thing that people are going for when it's really so brittle? When that frame is around it. There can be different frames, certainly, but that's often what it is.
Yeah. So what do you, when somebody has, I mean, on some level, all of us, I believe, even those who are very healthy when it comes to their bodies and sexuality, all of us hold some level of trauma when it comes to sexuality. And maybe I'd love to hear you just talk about when somebody is having a trauma response within their body, what kinds of things do you ask them to do in order just to start to be able to even, like, just some basic steps to enter into kind of healing of that sexual wound?
Well, I would want to know if it was someone who was with their partner or encountering someone where they're having that response, or if it's just by themselves or what. So I'd want to know a little more of the context. But let's say it came up during a partnered experience. First of all, I think the fact that both people would know this is happening and pause, because as soon as you move forward with it, you're really saying, I'm going to overlook this. And someone's someone's in fight or flight at that point. So I think really just slowing down and saying, hey, this is happening. And that the idea isn't we need to move towards penetrative sex and let's slow down to get you there. But the idea is let's calm down and relax together and see what might emerge next, right? Maybe there's like really tender holding or whatever. But I think what you decide to do there either communicates, I really care about this other human being and what their experience is. Or if you're pushing more kind of sexual engagement, that really shows entitlement and much more less care about the person. And that can go for men or women. I mean, whether, you know, or gay relationships or trans relationships, you know, it's.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that sex that is really focused on like self-gratification or even feeling better about myself because my partner is willing to have sex with me, as opposed to encounter and working with whatever comes up. And if it's like an unwelcome stiffening, if it's a lack of an erection, if it's whatever it is, to be able to be in that place without judgment, to be mindful, to go very slow. And when connection breaks, rather than moving on, like restoring, stopping until you can restore connection. And I loved what you said. I've never heard you talk about sex as counsel, but in counsel, we talk about reading the field, right?
Yeah.
Of being spontaneous and speaking, speaking from the heart. It's a different kind of speaking, I guess, but
Yeah.
and listening from the heart. So
you're gonna hear our puppy whimpering in the back. She's asleep and she's dreaming, probably chasing a little squirrel. So just to let you know, that's what that sound is. Yeah. The other thing that I want to say too is one place where couples often get stuck is when a man loses his erection. Everyone takes it way too personal. Okay. Whether a man has an erection or not does not mean that they're attracted to their partner or not. A lot of times partners will take it so personally that somehow if their husband or partner doesn't have an erection, that means that they're not attracted to them or they don't love them or, they're not pretty or whatever, all this stuff that is just nuts. Because why as a partner are you going to hang your value on whether your partner's anxious and can't get an erection? Okay. And so that's one way that I think often men, they will try to reassure their partner, no, you're so attractive and all that. And the thing is, you can't validate your partner enough for that person to deal with their own feelings around feeling inadequate. That's something inside of them. And so I think that's another huge pitfall is that couples make an erection just have way too much meaning. Really, what an erection is not having too much anxiety and having enough blood flow, right? And something that is sexually relevant, right? And when people pile on this additional meaning of, you have to support my ego and my sense of self-worth on your penis. I tell people all the time, you want to make sure a penis never goes up. Why don't you put your sense of self and your value on your partner's penis? You've just, created a death sentence for an erection. Versus something like every single man is going to lose erections. That's just normal. That's fine. And if people are really interested in penetrative experiences, there's lots of other things they can do there. You can, next time you lose your erection, just think, hey, I'm a versatile guy. I've got fingers. Maybe I'd like to get a toy, got a tongue. Your partner has fingers. Like, let's up the creativity here, people, as if an erection is just, or lack of one is going to stop the whole encounter between two human beings who are so creative. It shouldn't be so contingent on that.
You're getting not only to if we're talking about the penis, I mean, we're not only talking about shame around whether or not you can have and hold an erection, but also like penis size, which is like this another one of these kind of great myths that gets lots of airtime.
Mhm.
What does size matter?
Well, it does to a lot of people,
Yeah.
right? It does to a lot of men, because I have man after man say, okay, well, I'm 4.5 inches, or I'm 5 inches, or, or I have a micro penis. Um, and, people are saying it like this is the ultimate thing that really matters, right? Around a good sexual experience is the girth of a penis or the length of a penis. And first of all, it's such a narrow view of what's possible in sexuality. And it assumes that somehow a little more girth or a little more depth on a penis is going to be the thing that makes or breaks a sexual encounter, which is just a wrong framework, right? I think it has much more to do with the man behind the penis. And it doesn't matter if you have a 10-inch long penis that's 3 inches thick. If you're insecure, or you feel like you have to prove yourself, or, all that stuff, that your partner is going to see you, and they're going to map you, and they're going to know how you feel about yourself and how you feel about them. And I think the penis size, becomes much more secondary, right? And like, let's say for a guy who had a partner who wanted an experience of feeling fuller, well, great, you have fingers. You can go to, order on Amazon something that would be a little larger. And the thing is, some people want that, some people don't. But it would be for the man who would allow himself to do that with his partner, or if someone did want something bigger. Why does that have to be an ego hit? Right? What if that is okay, let's play there, let's try that. And that kind of soothing that a partner needs to do, to be able to say, okay, I'm willing to try that. That is so attractive, to not take things so personally, right? So normally I don't talk about penis size this way, but I'm just saying it this way. Usually I think it's way overinflated how, what people think around how important penis size is. And it just kind of misses the mark
Sure.
around what's really important. It's kind of like you're sitting in the council circle waiting and going, oh, that guy just said something really good. Is mine going to compare to his? And, it's the same kind of thing, versus just cut the bull of comparing yourself. And why don't you just show up as you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's when you've done your work. I mean, this applies to men or women. And the more of you there is, because the more soul growing you've
Mhm.
done, there's more to offer. And now you're loving somebody out from a place that is generative, as opposed to a place of need. And there's way more like possibility. There's more fruitfulness there. And body parts really are like, there's many ways to express, and you have all your senses to use. And the older you get, no matter how old you are, and no matter where your body is falling apart or sagging or not what it was, like your capacity for lovemaking should only grow the older you get. It's the pinnacle of your sexuality is not when you're an 18-year-old man. It's wait, really. I mean,
Thank God, right?
oh my goodness. Yes, yes. This is
Yeah,
the good news.
yeah. And a therapist who's a sex therapist that I've gone to a lot of trainings with, David Schnarch, says that sexual potential, meaning your ability to have really, really good sex, is highly correlated with cellulite. And culture would have you believe the opposite, that these
Uh-huh.
toned, beautiful bodies are when you're having it the best.
Yeah.
But the fact is, when there's more of a person behind the body, you're wise enough to know that wrinkles or sagging have very little to do with your ability to show up and to desire another person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to just, and to want to be wanted by another person. It gets much more profound.
I want to take a left turn, if that's all right, and move to a little bit of talking about fantasy and the erotic template. My sense, growing up in the church, which I would say, by the way, like the more what we've seen is the more conservative your upbringing is, or the culture is in your church, there is a direct correlation between that and sexual dysfunction. That somehow the way the conservative church has it suppresses sexuality. It introduces huge amounts of shame, which is like cold water on eroticism, and has been more largely problematic. And usually the more anyway, that's a little bit of a side note. But one of the things that I think coming up is that all fantasy is somehow like inherently there's something problematic with it. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to being curious about why are these things interesting to me, mm-hmm. right? Where did that come from? When, at what age, tell me again, like when is it that we've developed kind of our erotic template? It's pretty...
Yeah, researchers right now think about age 8 to 10, where there's going to be power dynamics in the home where you grow up that, just get wired into your brain, but that also get wired into your sexuality, and certainly going through puberty, as you're in an aroused state as a teenager, you're going to take things in even deeper around what the matrix was in your home, what the feel of it was like. And all of that is going to inform your fantasy. I think one of the biggest things, and I don't want to say just the church at large, but a lot of people who grew up with more conservative upbringings, one of the most damaging things, I think, is to have someone question their desire and to be scared of it and to turn against their own desire. Because really, going back to that picture of counsel, or when you're getting connected to your desire in the moment, that's when you're open. That's when you're offering yourself and stepping in. So I think one of the greatest harms in the church that I've heard is that people, their desire gets marked with suspicion and danger. And so people sever this really life-giving force in them. And now I'm forgetting where you were going as I said that.
No, I mean, that's so good. And so just to even say, rather than what is it, that just changes your posture towards fantasy.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden, this is something we can be curious about, we can explore, and there's something in it that
right.
is coming from part of my story, part of your story. And that it can even be a path to healing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people will, have these fantasies that they've had for a long time. And sometimes they'll be really developed. Sometimes there'll be little snippets for people, or maybe someone will see something on TV and they'll take that image that will be particularly appealing to them. But usually a sexual fantasy, and, I'm thinking of one book I read by Michael Bader. It was called Arousal, Unlocking the Secrets of Sexual Fantasy. It's really about how people try to resolve some sort of emotional conflict that they had when they were younger, and the fantasy resolves it. Either, if they grew up feeling really guilty that, for example, they couldn't help a parent enough, their fantasy somehow would relieve the guilt that would then free them up to feel arousal. And it's just an amazing how the brain works to be able to help someone do that, to feel arousal. And then what we also know around when people are in aroused states, their brain is more flexible. Their brain is more susceptible to change. And so, how amazing that our brains are already oriented to try to heal something emotional or solve it. And that our brains are more flexible there. It's just like this beautiful opportunity to look to see what's there, to understand yourself more. But then also, you can grow yourself in your sexual fantasies. As a side note, one thing that I want to say is that, you know, it's really common for people to be fantasizing about other people while they're having sex. And I think that each person needs to make their own discernment around what's wise for them to do as they're fantasizing. And certainly not, I don't want to name fantasy as bad at all, but I think there's also an element of knowing yourself and knowing where you have crossed a line in yourself. And if you're doing that, that's not going to be in line with you having integrity in yourself, wherever the line is for you. So I just wanted to say that piece too.
Well, the more present you can, and to the extent that fantasy might be making you less present in a partnered encounter, I mean, then we can start to see how this is actually, like, you know, antithetical to showing up, right?
Right.
But to the extent that you're actually able to bring your fantasy to the moment, and it be something that is engaged together, that's a whole nother thing. And of course, and then just, you were talking about the flexibility of the brain. And one of the things I've heard you talk about is not just, and I think these are slightly different, the way I hear you use these terms of flexibility is not one and the same as plasticity, right? So plasticity has to do with this ability to actually, to rewire the brain.
That's
and
right.
That when we're in an aroused state, our defenses are down, and our brain is way more plastic, and we're able to begin to form new neural pathways within our mind when we're in this aroused place. So this opens up not only the use of fantasy in that way of exploring it, but not just within the limitations of partnered sex, but also within masturbation and solo sex. I would love to hear you I've heard you talk about this. I think the other people who are watching this would love to hear you talk about the role of how you might use even something like masturbation for healing. And just to say, because knowing who's watching, that sexuality, I mean, it's everybody, including celibate priests, right?
Yeah.
This is a conversation for them as well. So.
Sure. And what I'll just say about that is each person will get to decide or discern what is in line with what they value and what is not. And so a celibate priest might choose to masturbate and have that be such an honoring, life-giving thing, such a beautiful thing. And maybe another celibate priest would go to the bakery and take in these gorgeous erotic smells, and that would be how they were expressing their sexuality. So I think there's just discernment for everyone across the board, right? And then as far as fantasy goes or masturbation goes, I'm thinking two things. One is, I think it would be good for every man watching who does masturbate is if he saw himself masturbating, if he like kind of did a third view in the room and watched, what would he see? And would he see a man who was taking his time and cultivating kind of this spaciousness? Or would he see a man who was feeling hurried or concerned that he was going to be walked in on? Or a man who feels conflicted about whether he should be doing this or not? Or, you know, how is the man touching himself? How are you, you know, as you watch yourself doing this, is he touching himself with care? Is he touching himself all over his body? Is he allowing himself to experiment? Or is he really only, you know, trying to get towards orgasm and, you know, not saying that's always bad, but just, you know, what kind of touch is he using? Is it performative? Is it aggressive? Is it tender? And I think it can be so wonderful for men to experiment with the kind of touch they're using on themselves, because your brain is going to map your touch. if you're going really fast or you feel like someone's gonna walk in, your brain will experience, this is like, okay, this is a little shameful, or this is, whatever. Versus if a man sets aside time, or, could be using good smelling lotions, or sets the lighting right, or touches himself with real gentleness or compassion, the brain is going to map all of that, and it's going to have more meaning. There's more respect or intention being brought to it. So that can be highly impactful, looking at the kind of touch you're using, and considering experimenting with different meanings, right? Of like, does the experimenting with meanings make sense around care or compassion or slowness, or even trying to drop your guard and touch yourself more gently, like we were talking about before, versus if you're walling up, that kind of thing. And then the other piece is around the fantasies that you have in your mind. You can actually start talking to and engaging the people in your mind. And one really interesting thing, and this is from the researcher and sex therapist David Schnarch, where I learned this, is that you can start asking people in your fantasies things, and they are going to show you basically at what level of development you're at. And fantasies are all encoded with letting you know what you're willing to accept from another person. And so, one way that could look is that someone saunters in and you start having sex with them in your mind. And you might say to that person, "Why are you having sex with me?" And the person, they might ignore you. The person might say something back and say, "I've been waiting for you to ask me that." Another person might say, "Shut up," and just keep going. And each of those things is going to reveal in your head if the people you're fantasizing about, first of all, are friends, if they want your goodness, or if they're really people who are antagonistic towards you. And there is stuff to work out there around, if someone says, "Shut up, I don't care," do you want the fantasy to progress in the normal way that it has gone? Or might you want to say something else to that person? Mm-hmm. And then you're up against these developmental things. Every person, their fantasy is kind of encoded with these things. And you could ask the person in your fantasy, "Do you see my normal life? Did you see me making breakfast this morning?" And some people's partners in their fantasy will say, "Yeah, I see everything you do." And some will say, "I don't care to know anything about you." And again, you get to see who these people are in your inner mental world, who are informing how you feel about yourself. Even if you're not engaging with them directly, those meanings are all still there. You're carrying them around, and you can start to shift them by the way that you choose to engage the other person. And with people that I work with, they try all sorts of things. So if the person in your fantasy will not give you the time of day, you can make snow happen in your fantasy to see if that will get their attention, or you can bring in a parade or whatever. The mind just has this huge amount of flexibility that will often influence the person in your mind mm-hmm. to respond differently to you.
So again, I want to take another turn, mm-hmm. which is to say that one of the things that I remember reading when I was doing for my own master's program about sexuality, mm-hmm. And this was coming from people who were not even necessarily all that spiritual, but as people in some of these practices matured, that all of a sudden, and they were working through, and just, maybe this is just a little bit of a side note, like, suffice to say that there are many who would say that if you want to understand a relationship like a marriage, then that the sex life can be a microcosm of the whole, and you can understand a lot about the whole relationship simply by understanding what's going on in the bedroom. And so I don't know if this is necessarily how you always work, Jamie, but I remember in the reading I was doing that as people were working within the context of their sex life, and they're starting to see some real growth and development there,
Mm-hmm.
that this whole awareness of a spiritual dimension starts to pop up for them, even if they're atheist, even if they're, and I don't want to say this is a hard and fast rule, but it was there in the literature in the sense that where is this coming from? That this spiritual dimension is starting to appear
Mm-hmm.
as we heal ourselves sexually. And I know you have a particularly like beautiful way of understanding um, this connection, this moment of the sexual encounter. And I would love for others to hear the same wisdom I've heard from you talk about with me.
Is it okay to pause for 1 second?
Sure, yeah. Okay, we're back.
Yeah. So the first thing that I want to say that struck me is that when you said, people who are spiritual, right? Or people who are not spiritual, and that there's this other dimension coming up.
I didn't mean to say that. I mean, I think all people are spiritual.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
that their level of awareness about this dimension
Right.
it varies,
Yeah.
or their belief in it varies. But
Yeah.
I think fundamentally every person is a spiritual being. So
Yeah. And then the way that I would describe it is more when people, whether it be in their sex lives, they see their limitations or they see their anxieties, for example. Um, and I'm trying to think of an example to give you. Like, let's say one partner feels obligated to have sex and the other person feels entitled to it, and they get grumpy when the obligation person doesn't follow through, and the obligation person follows through when they feel like, okay, well, I need to soothe my partner's anger. And so the sex really becomes about like regulating your partner's irritability, right? And your partner becomes much less attractive to you when you realize they can't soothe their own aggression, anger, whatever, right? But it would be for that person who feels obligated. They'd have to confront their own anxieties to say, I'm not moving forward being sexual with you right now because I want to create something that's good for both of us. And when I'm in a place of obligation, or when I say to you, hurry up, I know that that's putting anxiety into you, and that's an unkindness to you. And so I think, from that direction, the other direction around entitlement would be for the person to say, do I really want my partner to move towards me because I'm grumpy? Do I really want my partner to move towards me because I can't handle being told no? Right? And also, why is it that I want to move forward with somebody who clearly in this moment doesn't want to move towards me? Right? Why aren't you wanting more around this person really wanting you? So I was just gonna say, it looks like you were wanting to say something.
no,
Okay.
go ahead. You're about to
Yeah.
go through.
Right. And so I'm saying when people can start confronting themselves around this kind of stuff, or if the entitlement person said, how does it make sense that you don't want to have sex with me? How is that good judgment that you don't want to have sex with me?
And
If
not from a
someone,
place of suspicion, but of curiosity.
no, of going, this must make sense.
Yep.
I'm doing something that is making you recoil. And can we talk honestly about it? Because I don't need you to take care of my ego here. I actually want something better between the two of us. And I just think when people are willing to do that kind of thing, it's inspiring. It is spiritual because you're seeing people develop right in front of you and not being bound by their anxieties and their limitations and the ways they can't regulate themselves. It's them striving for more in themselves, not letting themselves get away with things that they know are undesirable.
Right.
Right? You see someone pouting, it's like, if you're pouting,
Right.
if you're a married person or whatever, that that's not the best in you. And when
This is,
you stop accepting that in yourself, it's really beautiful, and a spiritual dimension opens up more, because I think personal development is this, like, you're occupying a new space.
right.
And people, when they're having sex, after doing that more and more, they'll say things like, why do I even deserve this? This is so beautiful. You know, when they get to the point where they're not putting up with their own bull and their partner, you know, isn't either. There's just this kind of spaciousness that opens up between the two of them that's really clean.
Yeah. The part that I'm hearing you talk about is what I think in the 12 step you'd say, like, is this like the fearless moral inventory, like this, with like taking a hard look at oneself,
Mm-hmm.
um, but for a really good purpose.
Yeah.
So I mean, if there's one thing that I think I would want to make sure people know who are hearing this, is that like sexuality, our sex life, whether we're married or not, or whether we're partnered or not,
Mm-hmm.
that our sexuality can be part of like the holing, the healing of ourselves. It's not just an outcome that our sex gets better as we become more whole people, but
Mm-hmm.
as we work on like the sex life, it's our sex lives itself can be this doorway, this portal into the healing of ourselves, into the
Yeah.
holding, and it can be a whole lens of inquiry. uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, just we have a few moments left.
Yeah.
um, I know there's a few just very basic exercises that I would love for you, and then maybe even just a couple resources. For example, um, and we kind of got off on this earlier, but hugging till relaxed is like this wonderful way of becoming present and dealing with anxiety that's coming up. I wonder if you could describe hugging till relaxed, maybe
Mm-hmm.
like heads on pillows, or whatever
Yeah.
else you're wanting to
Yeah.
talk to.
Yeah, so first of all, you can find the exercises in the book Intimacy and Desire by Dr. David Schnarch. And really what they are is exercises for you to get connected to your own body and to calm yourself down. That's the whole point. And so the first one would be to hug your partner, which is really just put your arms around them, to steady yourself on your own 2 feet, and to breathe deep and start to let go, start to relax your body. And for a lot of people, they might be thinking, oh, my partner's holding on too tight, or, oh, I can't stand my partner. You know, these kind of exercises are not for people who just feel wonderful about their partner and their partner feels wonderful about them.
Right.
They're actually excellent exercises for people who are at each other's throats, or who feel a lot of distance or coldness for their partner. Because chances are, if you're withdrawn for them, or you're actually highly reactive, is what's really going on. You know, they walk in the room and you stiffen and you bristle, and you're thinking you're miles apart, but actually you're like emotional super glue. So what the exercise can do is for you to unhook from your partner, and it's an opportunity for you to calm yourself down, to get out of like putting all the blame on them, and just, your responsibility is just to calm your own body. So that exercise, 10 to 15 minutes, if people do it repetitively, it will change their brain, and it will help them get calmer, to get on top of their own emotional regressions. Another one is heads on pillows, where you're laying down and you could be eye gazing into your partner's eyes. I think another thing you could do is, if you're not partnered, or if you just want to try it yourself, get a mirror and look at your own reflection, and try to let down and let go, and try to touch your own eyes in the mirror.
Yeah.
And so it's, heads on pillows with the partners, you're doing that same thing. You're trying to relax your system, and you're letting down your defenses, and you're trying to make contact with the other person.
One of the things that we did, I remember in one of our Way of Counsel trainings, like a number of years ago, at Oracle, was we did, it wasn't heads on pillows, we were sitting facing each other. But both of the, I mean, and by the way, I think those exercises, they could be with a sexual partner, but they could be with anybody, right?
Yeah.
Could be with a friend, a child, a parent. But when we were doing it, not only were we connecting with our eyes, but then we were asked to see the other person and take them in from our gut and observe them. And there's the role of the one who's being seen and the one who is seen, and to see them from the gut and to be seen from the gut, to see from the heart, and then to be seen from the place of the heart, and then also from from this part. And it was, I mean, I have to say, like, the level of intimacy, there's no words, and you're just sitting with this person. We had a partner, and we probably sat with him for maybe like 15 minutes, this deep connection with somebody who I didn't even know that well. And yet it was, and I know it wasn't just like this sense of projection upon them, but there was a real form of meeting. And in that case, it wasn't, I mean, you would say that it probably was in a sense erotic or sexual.
I would.
Yeah, right? Because you had
I would say it's erotic, because how could you not encounter, a human being like that and be deeply moved or opened up? I mean, that's eroticism. Yeah. But, we want to make sexuality or eroticism into this kind of wrong thing or this usury thing somehow, versus it's you standing in your presence and being receptive to another human being and letting them touch you. Yeah. That's a sensual experience that can be very clean. It can also be not clean.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I have a feeling like we are just still scratching the surface. There's so many things I'd love to talk to you about. The funny thing is the first time Jamie and I did this video, we talked for 2 hours. So we'll have to do it again, because I don't even know what, and most of the things we talked about on that didn't even necessarily come up in this conversation, but so maybe
new things wanted to emerge this time.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do this again. So so if I just want to thank everybody. I mean, this, I know Jamie's not this isn't the only conversation like this that's been held within Illuman, but it's so wonderful, Jamie, to get a female perspective and the perspective of somebody who's really an expert, who's sitting in these conversations all day long with people and helping them. So thank you thank you, first of all, for coming today and walking us through this, but thank you for the work you're doing in the world. I know you're making this enormous difference in the kind of these sacred places of healings you get to sit with us as a therapist. So yeah.
And I thank you for that. And I would say, every person has an opportunity, whether I'm meeting, them in my office or virtually, or even in this group, that if there's something that was impactful or moving to you, you can step into that. Or with your partner, you can start asking harder questions around, how does it make sense that you don't want this? Or asking yourself that, how does it make sense that I don't want this? And answers will start to emerge and create more intimacy and depth, more honesty between the two of you. And, I hope that for everybody watching.
Yeah. So I think maybe just a way we could end our time is with this poem of David Whyte's that I know you're familiar with, that I think speaks so directly to the sexual encounter. It's by David Whyte. It's called Start Close In. Start close in. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. The first thing close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question. Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple. To hear another's voice, follow your own voice. To hear another's voice, follow your own voice and wait until that voice becomes an intimate private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Thank you, everyone.